Hello, hello. Thank you for joining me. About 14 weeks ago, I decided to start reading a book a week and externalize my studies in order that I can share with others who are interested in the same curriculum. I began my sharing by doing vocal readings of my favorite quotes from each book in my Instagram stories almost daily. Instagram stories expire after 24 hours. So I've gotten a number of requests that I share compilations of my vocal readings on a platform that doesn't expire. I've decided to begin to share them on YouTube. I thought that it was appropriate considering that book 14 is an Alan Watts book, The Meaning of Happiness, that I get started now. I have read most of Alan Watts' publications, but hadn't yet opened The Meaning of Happiness. He wrote this book when he was 24 years old, and I've been consistently blown away by Alan Watts' capacity to express himself so well at such a young age. The Meaning of Happiness has certainly not disappointed. Without further ado, let's get to the readings. This is day one, reading my favorite quotes from this book, Alan Watts, The Meaning of Happiness. I've added a link to the notes in the case that you'd like to see further details about the book. At each moment, we are what we experience. There's no real possibility of being other than what we are. Wisdom, therefore, consists in accepting what we are, rather than struggling fruitlessly to be something else, as if it were possible to run away from one's own feet. The problem before us is how to find such a center of relaxed balance and poise in man's individual life, a center whose happiness is unshaken by the world that goes on around it, which creates happiness because of itself and not because of external events. And this, in spite of the fact that it may experience those events in all their aspects and extremes, from the highest bliss to the deepest agony. In order to fulfill its function, the ego must be self-conscious, a faculty at once valuable and dangerous, for if the ego is deceived by that faculty, it falls into the vicious circle of trying to find happiness by its own power. When it is said that those who search for happiness never find it, perhaps the truth is that there is no need to search for it. Like our own eyes, it may be going along with us all the time, only when we turn round to try to see it, we make fools of ourselves. We know motion by contrast with stillness, long by short, light by darkness, heat by cold, and joy by sorrow. Therefore, to see life whole is to understand these opposing qualities as essential to its existence, without trying to interfere, without dissecting the body of the universe, so that its pleasant portions may be preserved and its unpleasant cast away. Just as too much light blinds the eyes, too much pleasure numbs the senses. To be a parent, it needs contrast. Man's difficulty is that his fear is seldom original. It is once or many times removed from originality, being not just simple fear, but the fear of being afraid. The tension of opposites is turned by man into destructive conflict. Clinging to one and fleeing from the other, he simply incites the one he flees to assert itself the more. In holding to pleasure and fear of pain, man starts the tension. But the real trouble begins when he tries to get rid not only of the pain, but of the tension as well, giving himself two enemies instead of one. A fun little insertion here. The following quote is so excellent. It's one of the few that I isolated to use to make a post, so that will be coming later today. Man is a meeting place for the interplay of forces from all quarters of the universe, swept through him in a stream, which is the power behind all his thoughts and actions, which is indeed more truly man's self than his body or mind. And as it happens, this next quote that I will be reading is the quote that I isolated and actually used to make a posting yesterday. Bewitched by his power of reason and urged on through fright of his fear, man seeks his freedom in isolation from and not union with nature, whose service is perfect freedom. The unhappiness of civilized man is chiefly the result of conflict with natural forces inside himself and inside human society, forces that are all the more dangerous and violent because they come in unrecognized and unwanted at the back door. This following passage, I'll read it in a few parts because it is a longer summary of thought. I've read similar thought from Watts before, or thought that has brought me to these conclusions, maybe. But I must say that the way that it is stated here is really opening some doors cognitively for me right now. At this point, two things must be remembered. First, that civilized man's division from nature is only apparent, and it would seem that this very appearance is part of a natural scheme of evolution, something into which we have grown by instinct, as the caterpillar grows into a chrysalis. Second, that although the return journey is done in consciousness, it is not done by consciousness, by the efforts of the self-conscious ego. This part of the journey is again as natural as the development of chrysalis into butterfly, and any attempt to force this growth egotistically is like trying to open the chrysalis with tweezers. By accepting the ego and the conflict which it involves, we also accept and become united with that which stands behind the ego and takes on self-conscious form, that is, with nature. It is obvious that unless we come face to face with the difficulty in ourselves, everything to which we look for salvation is nothing more than an extra curtain with which to hide that difficulty from our eyes. He who is free to love is not really free unless he is also free to fear. And this is the freedom of happiness. The spiritual is in no way divided from the material, nor from the psychic, nor from any other aspect of life. To find it, it is not necessary to go from one state of consciousness to another, from one set of senses to another, or from one world to another. In one sense, you feel that your life is not lived by you at all. The power of the universe, fate and destiny, God himself, are directing all your motions, and all your responsibilities are blown to the winds. In another sense, you feel free to move as you wish. You seem to be moving life with the same vast power with which life moves you, and your littlest acts become filled with gigantic possibilities. You no longer distinguish between what you do to life and what life does to you. It is as if two dancers moved in such perfect accord that the distinction between lead and response vanished. Thank you for joining me today in my studies. I'm reconnecting to the wonderment I feel in the fact that Alan Watts was 24 years old when he wrote this. Tomorrow I'll read my favorite quotes from the next 50 or so pages, and I'll look forward to seeing you then.